The story of the three wise men. It's familiar to us. We've seen it played out in pageants. At the very least, it will give us a sense of nostalgia. But it's actually more than that. It is one of the key stories from this book, this Bible, which we consider to be sacred texts. This Bible, the Old and New Testaments, the Hebrew Scriptures and the Gospels and the Epistles, all of this together, we consider this to be sacred texts. And so I want to start today by asking a simple question. I think it's an important one, and that is, what makes something sacred? What makes this text sacred? There are at least a couple of different ways that we can answer that. From a sociological perspective, this is sacred by tradition, because Christians throughout the history of Christianity have treated this book or some variation on these books as sacred and have turned to them in worship and in study to know and appreciate the revelation of God in Jesus Christ. But it's more than just tradition. From the perspective of a faith community, of this community of Christians across the world, this is sacred because we treat it with reverence. We come to these texts differently than we would other kinds of writing. I read the newspaper every morning, and I don't read it the same way that I read the Bible. I read a lot of novels. In fact, I'm reading a science fiction novel, an old classic right now. And I guarantee you I don't read that the way that I read the Bible. The Bible is sacred, and so we approach it with an expectation that what we will find there is some revelation of truth, some meaningful, valuable revelation of truth. We expect to find layers of meaning in the text. We are expectant that as we delve into this text, what we'll find will be worthwhile, and that we will grow spiritually by learning from these stories. In fact, I would even say that we approach these texts with an expectation that we might just be filled with a sense of wonder. But it's also true that we don't always experience a sense of wonder when we're reading a sacred text. So, what I'd like to do today is introduce you to, or remind you of, if you've already heard of it, an ancient practice for reading sacred texts. Christian sacred text. It's called Lectio Divina. And Lectio Divina is, it's Latin, and Lectio means reading, and Divina means divine. So this is a practice, a method, if you will, for reading sacred texts. And the reason I love this particular method, and there are many, many ways, many methods that we can apply with faith to the Scriptures. But this one, it tends to reveal the sense of wonder that is found in so many of these stories. Lectio Divina has 4 steps, okay? And roughly speaking, they are, number 1, to read the text. But not just read it like you would read the newspaper or a recipe book or a novel, but to read it prayerfully. And so oftentimes before we begin to approach the Bible or a portion of the Bible using Lectio Divina, we'll sit silently or say some sort of prayer, or maybe recite a verse from the Psalms, like Psalm 46:10, verse 10. Be still and know that I am God. And then from that place of peace, we read a portion of text. Now, with Lectio Divina, it's usually a small portion. It's not a story, but a verse or two from a story, and we let meaning arise from a verse or two of the story, certainly in context, but that verse. Now, the second step in the process of Lectio Divina is to meditate or ponder on what we have just read. Now, so far, this is probably very familiar to you. If you were treating any text seriously, you would read it, and then you'd think, okay, now, what does that mean? And what more might that mean than the surface meaning has given to me? You know, what does it mean in this context, etc.? The third step is to pray about what you've read and what you have pondered. And the final step is to contemplate. So, what I would like to do with you now is a simple example of Lectio Divina. And my hope is that with this simple exercise that we will do together, that we can experience some of that wonder that comes from reading this story of the Magi. I have chosen for this the first two verses of this of chapter 2 of Matthew. Before I read them to you, I invite you, if you would like, to close your eyes briefly. We're going to enter into a peaceful place of listening and of wondering. Be still and know that I am God, says the Lord. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." All right, that's our verse. I invite you to open your eyes and we will look closely at those two verses 1 and 2. First off, wise men. This translation, the New Revised Standard Version, translates the underlying Greek magoi as wise men. Magi were pagan scholars or religious people, and they were studying the stars. They were doing astrology, okay? And they were from the east. Now, what is east of Israel and Jerusalem but Babylon and Assyria? Well, there's a history there. When the Israelites were taken into exile, they were taken to Assyria and to Babylon, and there they would have been exposed to Zoroastrianism, right? This pagan religion that uses astrology to understand things spiritual and to understand the world around them. And so these wise men, these magi from the east, have done their thing, their pagan thing. They've looked at the stars and they've seen a new star rising and interpreted it that this star means that a Messiah has come, a new king to the Jews. And for some reason, that was important enough to them to travel all the way from the east, from Babylon or Assyria, it doesn't tell us which, but all the way from the east to Jerusalem. And in looking for the star, they go to Herod and they ask, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews?" In their own way, they have recognized that the Christ has been born. And somehow they recognized also that the significance of this was to all nations, their nation and to Israel. And that is key to this story. That is one of the reasons why we celebrate this story so wonderfully, so deeply in our own tradition, because it is the sign that the Christ child was born, that Christ came for all of us. Okay. We've read the passage, we've looked closely at it. Now let's read it again and we'll pray about it. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." The birth of Christ. God's light has come to the whole world. As I was praying about this yesterday, I was reminded of a quote from a Dominican priest, Father McCabe. He said, "You are to have no image of God because the only image of God is humanity." Isn't that interesting? You are to have no image of God because the only image of God is humanity. Obviously, he is recalling the creation story in Genesis, where we are told that humankind was created in God's image. As I continued to pray about this, I remembered a midrash that I heard, an elaboration of the story, an imaginative telling of the creation story, in which this midrash says that each of us are given at our birth a sliver of the divine image. Each of us carries within us a spark of that divine light, a unique piece of the divine light of God. And so each of us reveals God in our own way, just as Christ revealed God to us. And because each of us has that unique piece of the divine light within us, if we all get together like this, why then there's, 90, there's about 90 of us in here, I'm guessing. There's 90 unique images of the divine present in this room, and with all of us together, we reveal more of that divine image. Together, we reveal God in this deeper, more beautiful way than any one of us can do alone. I love that image of God gifting us with God's image, of God's light shining through us. So the final step in Lectio Divina is contemplation. So let me read this text to you one more time. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." In this final step of the Lectio Divina process, we contemplate the significance of that. What does it mean to us? What does it mean to us that God's light is found within each of us? God's light is present in us, among us. It is present for us. Thanks be to God. In our most difficult moments, God's light is present for us. And it is present through us for others, especially in their difficult moments. We can see the sacred image of God in others. And we can trust that that presence is there within each of us. And together we can allow more of that light and that hope, that love to be present in the world. And this image of God's This idea of God's image being present in each of us and God's light shining through us, it tells us that every human is precious, even the ones we don't like. Jesus said that we are to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. It's really hard sometimes to imagine that the light of Christ is present in others. But this midrash, this reading of the Magi's story, reminds us that it is present. The Magi look to the stars and see the light of Christ. They see that it has come to the whole world. It is worth traveling all the way from the east to Jerusalem. They followed that light. They followed the light of that star to the light of God in Jesus. And we follow the light of Christ. We Christians, followers of Jesus, by treating all of creation, all of life, all of humanity as revealing the light of God. The light has come to us here in this place, in the midst of suffering and uncertainty, in the midst of dissatisfaction and struggle. God's light came to us. The light of Christ, love, invests the world with purpose, beauty, and meaning, regardless of whether the world merits that. God didn't wait for us to get it together. God didn't wait for us to be perfectly spiritual and righteous. God sent the gift of Jesus to the world just as it is, and continues to send us that gift to us just as we are. The light of Christ, that love of God, bestows upon the mundane a sense of wonder, of seeing the world and life as radiant and sacred and sublime, just as it is and just as we are.